The Jets' defense could not have been much worse last year. Have they done enough to improve it during the offseason? I'll tell you what I think on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, March 10th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com, and I thank you for making the show your first listen or your first watch every day. The show is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button, and you'll never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, I ask you every day, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Well, yesterday we took a look at what the Jets did during the offseason to upgrade the offense. And today we're going to move to the defensive side of the ball. And if you watched the Jets last year, you knew it was not great. And what's been interesting over the last decade, as the Jets have really struggled, is they consistently have had pretty solid defenses. I mean, really, the reason the Jets have been bad over the last 10, 11 years has been their offense has just been so awful consistently. There are not many years where you can say they've been outright bad defensively, and that's especially true of the run defense. For a team that's been as bad as the Jets, they've had some excellent run defenses through the years, and they've been anchored by guys like David Harris and Jamal Adams. So they've had top-notch players, and they've had some very good interior defensive linemen. You want to go all the way back to Sione Puha, to Leonard Williams, who maybe underperformed but was an excellent run defender. The Jets have been able to stop the run. That was not the case in 2021. The defense was awful. The run defense was not good. And this team clearly needed to make some upgrades this offseason. So today we're going to discuss whether these upgrades have been made and how effective they've been. Now we're going to begin with the defensive line because in a Robert Saleh defense, I think we know he values defensive line above all else. Although maybe not quite to the degree we thought, and we'll get to that later. But Robert Saleh will tell you, defensive line is his number one spot. And the Jets, I think, are going to have some pretty big upgrades on this unit because, as I said yesterday, when you get a guy back from injury, that's almost like, especially when it's a guy who's projected to be an important player, an impact player, if you get him back from injury after he misses the full season or close to the full season, that's almost like a big free agent signing or trade or draft pick. And that guy I'm thinking about is Carl Lawson. And I've got to tell you, as I watched that Jets defense last year, it seemed to me like it was built completely around Lawson because on many early downs, you essentially had three interior linemen lining up on the line. And you had John Franklin Myers playing end, even though in a Saleh defense, a guy like John Franklin Myers would more traditionally be playing tackle because he's so big. And, he doesn't really have that explosion or the bend around the edge. And it seemed to me like the reason the Jets were playing big on the defensive line was they were trying to protect their smaller linebackers. And the reason they had smaller linebackers is they wanted them to cover more ground. And the reason they wanted them to cover more ground is that they didn't want to put a lot on the plate of their corners. So essentially, like I think like the way this defense was built, there was one guy whose job was primarily to get after the quarterback, and that was Carl Lawson. And I think that's why the Jets gave him so much money because John Franklin Myers had his moments. He had some excellent games, but this defense had to be built around one guy whose job is just to get upfield to get after the quarterback. And I think they really missed Law. I think it's impossible to overstate how much they missed Carl Lawson last year. And I know you can look at this and say, well, he didn't have a lot of sacks in Cincinnati. He was a guy who consistently generated pressures. Consistently generating pressures is really important. And the numbers suggest that Carl Lawson's been a bit unlucky in his career because if you consistently generate pressures at the rate of Lawson, you're going to have a lot of sacks typically. And I think the Jets were kind of looking for a breakout season in terms of sacks statistically. Carl Lawson, I think, was an enormous loss. In fact, I remember at the time saying something to the effect of, this was probably the player the Jets could least afford to lose on their roster outside of Zach Wilson because of how much was built around him. So they're getting him back, but they've also added some other pieces on this defensive line. I mean, they've layered pass rusher after pass rusher onto this unit. You've added Jermaine Johnson, trading up for him in the first round. And I think Jermaine Johnson adds some flexibility because lots of times rookies come into the NFL and they kind of are relegated to situational roles. And I do think Jermaine Johnson to a certain extent is going to be a situational player because of the way things have gone this offseason. I still think you're going to see a lot of Franklin Myers at the end. And Salah's kind of indicated this, where you'll see Franklin Myers kind of rotate between end and tackle. He'll slide inside on passing downs. But Jermaine Johnson can still come in rotationally, and he can still play early downs. I don't think he's going to be a full-time player this year. I think he'll probably be more of a situational guy. I think he'll come in on third downs, and the Jets will try and, he'll play ends. Franklin Myers will slide inside to tackle, and on early downs, you'll still see Franklin Myers at the end. But, if there's an injury or something, or even if somebody just needs a rest, he's not a guy who's going to hurt you because he can play the run. Playing the run, he's a very effective guy at playing the run. And I do think he's a little bit more refined than your typical defensive end coming to the league. He knows how to use his hands well. So and this goes back to his age. People talk about the downsides of drafting an older player. Johnson, 23 years old, kind of old for a draft pick. Well, the upside to that is typically with an older player, they're more developed physically, and they're a little bit further along in refining their game. So you expect more from the very beginning. Maybe the player doesn't have not having as much room to grow is a kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you're closer to your ceiling, so there's less to imagine about what a player could be, but the other side of being closer to your ceiling is that you kind of have a good idea of what you're getting. And Jermaine Johnson, I think, helps the Jets out. I think he can help. Again, I don't know that he's going to be a full-time player this year, but I think he's the type of guy who can be a quality rotational player, and they'll definitely be looking for an impact on passing downs. They also added a couple other pass rushers, Jacob Martin from Houston, who's a guy who's developed pretty well and he'll be a situational guy. I think that's the situational guy. I think that's the guy who comes in on passing downs just to get after the quarterback. And even Vinny Curry, who I was more excited about a year ago, but Vinny Curry's been a very good player in this league for a very long time. This is a guy I think I've mentioned this. Like, I've been obsessed with getting Vinny Curry on the Jets, which is funny because he's obviously been a very solid backup guy. He's been a very solid rotational guy. This is a guy I've wanted on the Jets for years. I remember back in 2014 and 2015, that period when Curry had kind of gotten off to a slow start in his career in Philadelphia, and I remember I came up with this idea maybe the Jets could trade Stephen Hill for Vinny Curry, and one of those our bust for your bust swaps. And of course, Vinny Curry ended up developing into a pretty solid role player for Philadelphia. And I don't want to count on him for too much. He may not even make the team. He's in his 30s. He's older, but he's always been a good player. So I think he can help the Jets out there. And, Quinnen Williams, we'll see what he can do. I think Quinnen Williams has established himself as a very good player. In fact, I'd argue Quinnen Williams is a little underrated. I think Jets fans are upset that he's not Aaron Donald, that he's not even Fletcher Cox. That's not a guarantee when you pick third overall. I think in retrospect, I think in context, if you look at what Quinnen Williams has done during his career, he's more than justified the third overall pick. If he keeps on the pace he's at, yeah, maybe he's not the superstar you wanted, you dreamed of, that he got hyped out to be, but he's still a very good player. I think sometimes we're too hard on prospects who are good but not great. The problems with the Jets are not the Quinnen Williams type draft picks. They're the Christian Hackenberg type draft picks. They're the Ja'Kai Polite type draft. Those are the reasons the Jets are bad. It's not because Quinnen Williams is just a good player, not a Pro Bowler or an All-Pro. And then outside of that, you have a couple depth guys, Sheldon Rankins, who admittedly I was very excited about last year and really did not live up to the billing. He was okay as a pass rusher. He did have one. I always go back to the one pressure he had in overtime against Tennessee that forced an early Ryan Tannehill throw on a third down play, and that forced the Titans to attempt a long field goal that they missed that won the Jets the game. And then you have guys like Nathan Shepard, who is Nathan Shepard. I don't really. I mean, Nathan Shepard actually, if you watch him on a per play basis, he actually does win his assignment a fair share of times. He just has given so many penalties. Now, but there is something that's lacking there, because the Jets did let somebody get away, and I understand why they let him get away. I think financially probably did not make sense for him. And admittedly, I'm a little biased here because this is a guy I've absolutely loved through the years, but that's Foley Fatukasi. And they're lacking that run-stopping guy on the interior. Now, admittedly, Foley Fatukasi did not have a good 2021 season. So, maybe there's a question, is he a good fit for this team? Maybe are the Jets looking to get away from that type of two-gapping lineman? Maybe are they looking for more guys who are just going to penetrate and make plays in the backfield? possibly. I mean, it's difficult to say exactly what direction this is going in, but they did not really replace Foley Fatukasi. And I do have questions there, especially given their struggles against the run last year, because even though, listen, part of the struggles were because Foley Fatukasi took a step back this past season. There's no question about that. And I don't think they would have been as bad if Foley Fatukasi had played close to his 2019 or 2020 levels, where it was a tremendous I think people underrate how much of an impact he had those 2 years. When I talked about guys who really helped the Jets shut down the run, Foley Fatukasi is near the top of the list in 2019, 2020. I would say even one of the top run-stopping nose tackles in the league. I mean, I think you have to be specific there. I don't think you could say, one of the best defensive tackles because he's not much of a pass rusher, but when it comes to playing the run, he was up there. And they really have not replaced him. So that's really the question that I would have. I think they've upgraded the pass rush. If you include Lawson coming back, this should be a vastly upgraded pass rush. I do wonder a little bit about the run game, though, because this is not a defensive line that has a tremendous amount of run stoppers. And I think there might be some questions about these linebackers. And I'll tell you what I mean by that as we continue on this Tuesday episode of Locked On Jets. Of course, we're now deep into the offseason here. We're in the OTA phase of the offseason. We'll have mini camp coming up, and then we'll be waiting for training camp. But believe it or not, you can still bet on the upcoming NFL season. BetOnline has NFL Future, so if you really like what the Jets did this offseason, you can put some money down and earn some cash. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and the Stanley Cup playoffs, although rough night last night for you Rangers fans. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Of course, Woody Johnson's the owner of the Jets, and I'm sure he hopes that the Jets injected some energy into their franchise with the picks they made in the 2022 NFL Draft. But no owner of a business wants to have a hassle when they're making energy decisions. You just want your business to run smoothly and pay a fair rate for power. But coming off the back of one of the highest priced winters of the last decade, if your business was on a purely variable or market rate, you paid out the nose. Many New York business owners switched suppliers out of frustration, but unless they chose alternative pricing options, they're still at risk for another January repeat. Catalyst Power partners with you or your trusted energy consultant to produce a power supply plan that fits your business and your market risk tolerance. They have a suite of options customizable to your business's needs, including options that will bundle with or focus on renewable energy. Right now in New York, they're offering an on-site solar solution for your business that requires zero installation, maintenance, or material purchase cost. That's right, no CapEx cost for you. To sweeten the deal, qualified businesses could be eligible for up to 6 months of an at-cost energy supply from Catalyst Power. Go to catalystpower.com/lockedonjets to learn more. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or your first watch every day. This show is free and available on all platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, please give the episode a big thumbs up. It helps the channel out. Today we're talking about changes the Jets made on their defensive side of the ball this offseason. And we're going to move to the linebacker position. And really, there aren't many changes. They let Jared Davis go. Jared Davis was a complete whiff by Joe Douglas last year. There's no other way to put it. I mean, you can blame them getting injured, but this was a guy, they were kind of taking a chance on him. I think they had the theory that he was misused in Detroit when the Jets got him. They thought he'd be a better fit for the Robert Saleh defense. He really was not very good. In fact, he got benched. He became a healthy reserve. It wasn't so much injury that sent him to the bench permanently. It was just he wasn't playing very well. He was replaced by Quincy Williams. And Quincy Williams, of course, was a waiver wire pickup from Jacksonville. And, you don't build your team through the waiver wire, but it's a way you can build depth. It's a way you can find a quality piece here or there. And I think to Joe Douglas's credit, you look at his 3 years as general manager, he's made a couple of really good waiver wire pickups. He got Braxton Berrios off waivers from New England. John Franklin Myers, who we just talked about, was a waiver wire pickup from the Rams. And the third waiver wire pickup that seems really good right now is Quincy Williams. He and C.J. Mosley play linebacker for the Jets. See, this is one of those positions, we always try and divide things into this is great or this is terrible. The linebacker group for the Jets, I think, is somewhere in between. it's not the kind of group that's going to make your defense good. It's not going to be the driving force behind a great defense. But sometimes you have guys who are maybe not great, but they're not so bad that they'll drag your defense down if everything else is working for you. And I think last year too much was put on these linebackers. And, CJ Mosley, I know he won the team MVP award last year. And I'm not saying he was bad, but I don't think he played at like a team MVP level. And he certainly was not the guy who was so good in Baltimore. And, you go back, look, the Jets overpaid CJ Mosley. I said that the day it happened. The Jets way overpaid CJ Mosley. I mean, for CJ Mosley to justify his contract, he'd have to be Ray Lewis. And he's not Ray Lewis. He was a very good player with Baltimore. He's still a pretty solid player with the Jets. He's not a bad player with the Jets. But he's not the guy he was in Baltimore. He's not worth the money the Jets are paying him. And Quincy Williams was an excellent waiver wire pickup. But the threshold for waiver wire success is much lower than it would be a Pro Bowl level linebacker. And I do think there were moments last year when these linebackers got exposed. They definitely got exposed in coverage. I mean, neither of these guys was particularly adept in coverage. I'd say that's true in zone. I'd say that's true in man. And there were definitely times where they were in the wrong spot. They missed their gap. There was a shift on the offense and their gap assignment changed. And what I mean by gap assignment is in the run game, typically, if you're playing in the front, if you're a defensive lineman or a linebacker, you're assigned a gap. And a gap is the space between blockers. So it could be the space between a center and a guard, or a guard and a tackle, or a tackle and a tight end, or just the outside gap. And essentially, your job is to stop any run that goes there. And there were times where they filled the wrong gaps. In fact, there were a lot of times where I thought they filled the wrong gaps. And sometimes what happens is the team will move the tight end in motion, or they'll shift their alignment, and the gaps will change right before the play. So the players need to be able to adjust. They need to be able to see that. And there were times where they did not do that last year. But these guys, they had their moments. I mean, CJ Mosley had some excellent individual games, as did Quincy Williams. I do think, like linebackers, there are certain positions where you don't get noticed if you're doing your job, but you get noticed if you fail at doing your job, like safety. Like a deep safety who does his job well, like a Marcus May, you don't really notice him that much. You notice him when he gets burned for a touchdown, but you don't notice him when he's doing his job. Linebacker is kind of the opposite. Linebacker, you notice when Quincy Williams is delivering a big hit. You don't notice it as much when he fills the wrong gap and that turns into a big run. I'm not saying these guys were bad, but I think like CJ Mosley's team MVP award, that to me spoke more to how respected he is in the locker room. And I think he does, by all accounts, he brings a lot of locker room leadership. He's a great guy to have around. He's a great guy to have around a young player like a Quincy Williams. But he's not I don't think he's at the point of his career, if he ever was, and maybe you could argue either way. I don't think he's at the point of his career where he's the driving force behind the defense being really good. I think they play the run well enough. I think they have some games where they really stand out, but I don't think they're consistent enough. And my concern this offseason was that it seemed like the Jets were not convinced that like they needed an upgrade at the linebacker position. And I questioned that a little bit because, again, these guys were not spectacular. They're not awful, but they're not great. So the question was, and I've heard, if you read the beat writers, there's talk Quincy Williams has Pro Bowl potential. Maybe he does, but I don't know that I'd want to bank on that. I did not have the only way I'd be okay with bringing back these linebackers is if the Jets really upgraded the rest of the defense. And because I think there was too much on the plate of the linebackers last year. So I think they needed to upgrade the defensive line and they needed to upgrade the corner position and essentially turn CJ Mosley and Quincy Williams into role players instead of the driving forces behind the defense. Now, they brought back similar corner group. They brought back a similar defensive line. And once again, Quincy Williams, CJ Mosley are the driving forces behind your defense. I have an issue with that. But because they upgraded the rest of the defense, I feel better about having these guys. I feel like if these guys are like your 7th or 8th or 9th or 10th or 11th best players, your defense could be pretty good. And I think that's probably where they are right now. So these are not guys you want to be the dominant players on your defense, but if they're like your lesser players, you're in decent shape. And part of the reason they're lesser players is that the Jets did upgrade part of their defensive backfield this offseason. However, there are questions about another area in the secondary, and I'll tell you what those are as we continue on this Tuesday episode of Locked On Jets. course, Joe Douglas was focused on fixing the Jets defense this year, and you should know this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto, and if you need to fix your car or truck, you should go to rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure just pointless questioning, and you have to wait while the person behind the counter orders a part on their computer, and it's the only part their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket, so save time and money while using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and their prices are reliably low for every customer. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Tuesday, we're going through the Jets defense, talking about the upgrades that they made during the offseason, as the movement period of the offseason is now largely complete. The Jets have gone through the draft. Most of the free agents have signed. There may be a move here or there, but we now largely know what the roster is going to look like, and it's a good time to take stock of what the Jets did during the offseason. Now we're going to talk about the defensive backfield, and there's no question. I think that this is the most improved spot on the team, the corner position in particular, because last year's starters are now backups. And the Jets are good. It's one thing to be good. It's another thing to be deep. I think you can make a case the Jets are both good and deep at corner, because obviously they drafted Sauce Gardner 4th overall. I still am surprised that they did it. Pleasantly surprised, because I like Sauce Gardner. I did not think Saleh valued corners enough, and maybe he doesn't. It's always possible that Saleh is not a big believer in investing in corners, but he's just willing to make an exception for a Sauce Gardner, the way maybe Joe Douglas doesn't believe in investing in running backs, but he'll make an exception for somebody like Breece Hall. Sometimes you have to be flexible when there's an exceptional talent available. And they also added DJ Reed from Seattle. So this pushes Bryce Hall to the bench. To me, Bryce Hall is one of the best backups in the NFL now. So now you're deep. You got two guys who legitimate skills as starters, and you're deep. And even Brandon Echols, who I don't really believe in, if he's my number 5 corner, that's a pretty good number 5 corner. Maybe he's not more than that. I don't even know if I like him as a number 4 corner. Number 5 corner, though. Compare the number 5 corners in the NFL, Brandon Echols probably rates pretty high. Now, what's interesting about this is that Saleh has a reputation for being a zone coach. So people see Sauce Gardner, they say, this guy's really a man corner. What's going on here? Well, first of all, the Jets do think Sauce Gardner can play zone very effectively. I mean, Saleh was pretty clear about that in the post-draft press conference. But the way I describe the Jets defense is, today's NFL things are very specialized. And the Jets essentially have a first and second down defense, and they have a third down defense. And the third down defense is much more aggressive, lots more blitzes, lots more man coverage. And it's really important if you're going to blitz on third downs, especially on third downs. I'll tell you why it's important, especially on third downs, to have a shutdown corner. Because that's the down where everything's on the line. And when everything's on the line, the other team's quarterback's going to be looking first and foremost to his number 1 guy. Now, I know he does that all the time, but when the game's on the line, you would like to avoid going away from your number 1 guy. You want to go to your best guy, and you know what? If our best guy can't win one-on-one, so be it. And I think the hope is that the Jets found a guy who can shut down the other team's number 1 guys on third downs. And that, to me, that's the reason they got Sauce Gardner. Yeah, of course, they think he can play zone on first and second down as effectively. But I really think they view him as the type of guy that when the chips are down, when everything's on the line, he's going to be the kind of guy they can trust to lock up the other team's best receiver. And DJ Reed on the other side should be very solid. He's played in Saleh's system before, albeit as a slot corner, but he went to Seattle, and there's a lot of overlap between the Seattle system and the Robert Saleh system. Robert Saleh coached at Seattle early in his career. It's kind of where he developed his philosophies on the defensive side of the ball. And DJ Reed did an excellent job as an outside corner last year, and the Jets got him in free agency for what on paper seems like a good value. Now in the slot, you have Michael Carter II. Some people don't believe in him. I actually do like him. I like this corner group now. I really like this corner group now. I think the Jets have done a great job. There are two spots where I will, I'm cautiously optimistic a lot of areas of this Jets team. There are 2 areas where I'm wildly optimistic of based on what they did in the offseason. That's running back getting Breece Hall, and that's corner adding DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner. So I think this could be a really good corner group. And there's kind of this relationship. The pass rush and the corners are kind of tied together, because if you can get to the quarterback, your corner's job is easier because they don't have to cover for as long. But if you have guys who can lock up the other team's receivers, your pass rush is better because they can get to the quarterback. They have more time to get to the quarterback. Ideally, you want both, though, and I think that there's an argument to be made. The Jets may have both right now. So that's a good thing. Then you have safety, and safety, I think, is a bigger question mark. Now, they got Jordan Whitehead from Tampa Bay, who's a guy who really excels playing close to the line of scrimmage. He's a guy who should help them in the run game. I mean, safeties, unless you have Jamal Adams, like the Jets version of Jamal Adams, not the Seattle ridiculous version, but like outside of like the Jets version of Jamal Adams, a safety is typically not going to be like a guy who really is a driving force behind your run defense. But Jordan Whitehead should help. The big question for the Jets is this is the one area where I think they should have done more to address it in the offseason, is the free safety position, the guy who's deep. As far as I can tell, the Jets kind of do designate, you have your deep safety and then you have your safety who plays closer to the lines. Other teams more mix and match. I think the Jets, based on what I saw last year from Saleh, based on the research I've done, the Jets are more of we have a deep safety and we have a close to the line safety, and Jordan Whitehead's going to be the close to the line safety. The deep safety position is a question mark. That's kind of a wild card because LaMarcus Joyner's back, but LaMarcus Joyner, played 13 snaps last year. And not only that, he's in his 30s, so, can he stay healthy? But beyond that, he hasn't really played free safety since 2018. So you're talking about a guy who is old, had an injury last year, and hasn't really played the position you're asking him to play in 4 years. That's a question mark. You have Jason Pinnock, who played pretty well at the end of last year, but that's a big projection. Then you have Ashton Davis, who I do not believe in at all. Listen, I'd love to be proven wrong by Ashton Davis, but I've seen nothing to change my mind from when they drafted him. That's the question mark, and that's a spot where you don't like to have question marks on your last line of defense. So if I had a criticism of what the Jets did this offseason on the defensive side of the ball, not having more of a focus on free safety would be at the top of the list, because I think that's a really important spot in this defense. I think it's a spot that really hurt them last year, and I think that while there's a path to success, a Joyner staying healthy, a Pinnock developing as a safety, there's a pretty clear danger at that position. So that's the one area maybe I'd criticize the Jets a little bit for this offseason, because I think they needed to do more to address. I think they needed to be more proactive in that area. I think they were proactive in the other areas where they needed to be. That's the one area where I think they missed out a little bit, but we'll see what happens, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's all for today's episode, however. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's our motto. If you enjoy the show, hit that subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps the channel out and helps other Jets fans find this podcast. I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday, and send in your mailbag questions, because tomorrow we will have our weekly mailbag show.